Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
An unknown woman texted me. Do you know your husband has been married to me too for 10 years? I didn't believe it, and we met for coffee. When I saw her, I could not believe my eyes. Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had the kind of marriage people envied. Daniel and I had been together for 12 years, married for 9. We lived in a pale yellow house on Clover Street in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of street where neighbors wave from their driveways and kids draw chalk animals on the sidewalk. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit, a vegetable garden that never quite produced enough tomatoes, and a Saturday morning routine that I could have described in my sleep. Coffee, the New York Times crossword, his hand on my knee under the table. I was a high school English teacher. He was a civil engineer who traveled for work, sometimes a week here, sometimes 10 days there. I didn't question it. Infrastructure doesn't build itself, and Daniel had always been the responsible, steady type. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment the first hairline crack appeared. I just didn't recognize it for what it was. It was a Tuesday in March, about 14 months before everything fell apart. Daniel had come home from a supposed 2-week project in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd made his favorite dinner, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, and set the table with actual cloth napkins, the kind we only used when we were trying to make an occasion feel special. He walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and said the chicken smelled wonderful, normal, warm. And yet, something was slightly off in the way he moved through the house. Too deliberate, like a man reminding himself where things belonged. He opened the wrong cabinet looking for a glass. He'd lived in that kitchen for 9 years. I told myself he was tired. The second crack came 2 months later, in May. I found a gas station receipt in the pocket of his jacket while doing laundry. The gas station was in Dayton, about an hour and a half from Columbus, on a Wednesday when he'd told me he was working late at his downtown office. I held that slip of paper for a long time, standing in the laundry room with the washing machine churning beside me. Then I put it back in his pocket, washed the jacket, and didn't say a word. I told myself there was probably a logical explanation. Maybe a detour, a client visit, something he'd forgotten to mention. I was very good at talking myself out of worry. Summer brought more small things. A phone left face down on the counter, which wasn't unusual on its own, but became a pattern. Weekend calls he took outside, pacing the backyard with his voice low. A name I didn't recognize appearing twice in his phone when it lit up with a text, R. Holloway. I asked once, casually, who that was. A contractor I'm working with, he said, not looking up from his laptop. I nodded. I chopped the bell peppers I'd been holding and said nothing more. I think the worst part, when I look back, is not what Daniel did. It's how hard I worked to not see it. By October, the absences had grown longer. He was flying to Charlotte every 3 weeks now, sometimes staying 8 or 9 days. He always had explanations, delays, complications, project extensions. He always called every evening. He always came home with his dry cleaning done and his suitcase smelling of the same detergent we used at home. That detail should have struck me as strange. It never did. And then came November 4th. I was sitting at the kitchen table grading papers, junior essays on the Great Gatsby, the irony of which I only appreciated later, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was spam, or one of those robo-texts about a package I hadn't ordered. But I opened it. "Hi, I know this is going to be a shock, and I'm sorry for that. My name is Rachel. I think we need to talk. I believe we are married to the same man. His name is Daniel Edward Marsh. He has been my husband for 10 years. I have proof. Please don't delete this. I'm not your enemy. I read it 4 times. Then I sat very still for what felt like a long time, listening to the sound of the refrigerator humming and Biscuit's nails clicking across the kitchen floor. My red pen was still in my hand. On the top essay on my pile, a student had written, "Gatsby believed in the green light, the future that year by year recedes before us." I put the pen down. I typed back, "Who are you, and how do I know this is real?" Her response came in under a minute. "Meet me for coffee. You'll know when you see me. I promise you'll understand." We agreed to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop called Brood Awakening on High Street. Neutral ground, public place, somewhere I could walk out of if I needed to. I almost canceled 3 times that week. Every morning I woke up and thought, this is insane. This is some kind of scam. There's a rational explanation. Every evening, I watched Daniel across the dinner table, his familiar hands, his laugh at something on television, the way he always left one bite of food on his plate. And I thought, I know this man. I have known this man for 12 years. This is impossible. I didn't tell him about the messages. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work, taught my classes, walked Biscuit, and carried the weight of those words inside me like swallowed glass. He has been my husband for 10 years. Saturday came gray and cold, the kind of Ohio November that makes the whole world feel provisional. I drove to High Street alone. I sat in my car outside Brood Awakening for 11 minutes before I went in. I ordered a latte I didn't drink. I took a table near the window and watched the door. Rachel Holloway walked in at 10:03 a.m., and that was the moment I understood why she'd said, "You'll know when you see me." She was, I don't have a better word for it, a version of me. Not a twin, not a copy, but a woman built along the same proportions. Medium height, dark hair, olive-ish complexion, somewhere in her late 30s. She was dressed practically. A navy coat, flat boots, a canvas tote over one shoulder. She looked like a woman who graded papers or organized community fundraisers or knew how to parallel park on the first try. She looked, in other words, like someone Daniel would have chosen. The nausea hit me before she reached my table. She sat down. We looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Then she placed her phone on the table between us, screen up, and showed me their wedding photo, Daniel. Younger by a few years. Same smile, same slightly crooked tie. Standing beside a woman, beside her, in front of a courthouse in Charlotte, North Carolina. The date stamp on the digital file read September 14th, 2013. Daniel and I had married on June 7th, 2015. He had married Rachel first. I don't remember the exact order of words that passed between us in the next hour. I remember the coffee shop filling up around us, the noise of the milk steamer, a child laughing somewhere behind me. I remember Rachel's voice, steady, careful, like someone who had been rehearsing for this moment for weeks, because she had been. She'd found out about me 6 weeks earlier, she said, when she'd discovered a second phone in a box in Daniel's home office in Charlotte. Their home office, In their house, the house where she'd lived for 9 years. On that phone, my name, my photo, a saved contact listed simply as home. Rachel was an accountant. She had already pulled financial records. Daniel had been living 2 complete lives, maintaining 2 households, 2 mortgages, 2 sets of utility bills, funded largely through a private LLC he'd set up as a consulting arm of his engineering work. He wasn't traveling for work. The travel was the switching. 1 week with me in Columbus, 1 week with Rachel in Charlotte, rotating for a decade with a logistics precision that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. I drove home in silence. Daniel was watching a football game when I walked in. He looked up and smiled. "How was your morning?" he asked. "Fine," I said. I ran some errands. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and let myself cry for exactly 20 minutes. Then I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and made a decision. I was not going to panic. I was not going to confront him yet. Not without more information. Not without protection. I had read enough about these situations to know that the moment he felt cornered, things could change fast. I needed to be strategic. That afternoon, while Daniel napped on the couch, I began making a list. First, I needed a lawyer, specifically a family law attorney with experience in bigamy cases. Second, I needed my own financial records, copies of tax returns, joint bank account statements, mortgage documents, everything I could access without alerting him. Third, I needed to understand what Rachel had already gathered and what we might be able to combine. We had exchanged numbers that morning. She texted me one word when she got home: solidarity. I stared at that word for a long time. I didn't love Rachel Holloway. I didn't know her. But we were, whether we had chosen it or not, in the same sinking boat. And I had always been a strong swimmer. The plan was simple in outline, even if the execution would be anything but. Document everything, secure my finances, consult legal counsel, and act. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the cold, careful precision of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. I looked across the hall at the man sleeping on my couch. He thought I was naive, I thought. He was wrong. The following Monday, I called in a personal day and drove across town to the office of Patricia Okafor, a family law attorney whose name I'd found through a state bar referral service. I'd searched from my work laptop during my free period on Friday. Not my home computer, not my phone. I was already thinking that way. Patricia's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, modest but professional. Diplomas on the wall, a rubber plant by the window that looked like it had survived decades of difficult conversations. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of calm that comes from having heard every variety of human disaster. I told her everything. I showed her Rachel's wedding photo, the dates, the Charlotte address. I explained what Rachel had told me about the LLC. I laid it out as clearly as I could, the way I'd organized it in my head all weekend, the timeline, the evidence, the financial structure. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down. "What you're describing," she said carefully, "is bigamy. In Ohio, that's a 4th-degree felony." I heard the word felony and felt something shift behind my sternum. Not satisfaction, not quite, but a kind of terrible clarity. She explained the landscape. Because our marriage was the second one, Daniel and Rachel's 2013 courthouse wedding predating ours by nearly 2 years. My marriage to Daniel was legally void. Not voidable. Void. It had never been legally valid. This was both the most devastating thing she told me and, she explained, potentially the most legally useful. I was, in the eyes of Ohio law, not a scorned wife seeking divorce, but a fraud victim. That distinction mattered. Can I sue him? I asked. For intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraudulent misrepresentation, and potentially for recovery of financial contributions made under the false pretense of a valid marriage? She allowed herself a small, precise smile. Yes, and there's a strong case. I left her office with a typed list of documents to gather, and a retainer agreement signed with a check I'd written from my personal savings account, one I'd opened 17 years ago, before I ever met Daniel, and never merged with our joint finances. That old habit, which he'd teased me about more than once as being overly independent, had just become my lifeline. The document collection took 8 days. I was meticulous. I worked in the evenings while Daniel was downstairs, accessing online portals on my phone with a new email address I'd created on a library computer. Bank statements, our joint mortgage, property tax records, his business registration for the LLC, D.E. Marsh Consulting, incorporated in North Carolina in 2011, which was public record and took me 4 minutes to find on the State Business Registry website. Rachel had her own copies of the Charlotte mortgage, the utilities, their joint accounts. We coordinated carefully over text, keeping our messages brief and factual. Two women calmly assembling a case file the way you might organize a classroom or balance a quarterly ledger. Daniel noticed nothing, or so I thought. It was a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of November when I realized he might be more alert than I'd assumed. I'd been in the kitchen reviewing a bank statement on my phone when I heard him come downstairs earlier than expected. I switched screens quickly, smoothly, I thought. But when I looked up, he was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not suspicion exactly. More like the careful attention of a man recalculating something. "You seem distracted lately," he said. "Everything okay?" "Midterm fatigue," I said. "You know how November is." He nodded, made himself a glass of water, but he stood at the counter a beat longer than necessary, and I felt the back of my neck prickle. He was starting to notice the temperature change. The irrefutable proof came on the 22nd of November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. Rachel had pressed her case further than I had. She was further along emotionally, having had 6 weeks more head start on grief. And she'd hired a private investigator in Charlotte to document Daniel's comings and goings. The investigator had followed him on a Tuesday and tracked him to the Charlotte house, where he and Rachel had dinner, where he slept in their shared bed, and where, the following morning, he sat at the kitchen table in his bathrobe reading the news like a man utterly at home, because he was. Rachel forwarded me the investigator's report and photos. Time-stamped, geotagged, legally obtained. I sat in my parked car in the school lot on my lunch break and looked at a photograph of my husband drinking coffee in another woman's kitchen, in the home he shared with his actual wife, wearing the bathrobe I had never seen before because he kept it in Charlotte. There was no explanation left to construct. There was no alternative story to tell myself. I forwarded the report to Patricia immediately. She replied within the hour, "This is your point of no return. Are you ready to proceed?" I typed back without hesitation, "Yes." Patricia filed the civil fraud complaint on the Monday after Thanksgiving. I wasn't home when the process server arrived. I had deliberately planned it that way. I'd driven to my sister Karen's house in Worthington that morning with biscuit and an overnight bag, telling Daniel only that I needed a couple of days with family. He hadn't questioned it. He'd kissed me on the forehead and told me to drive safe. He found out what was happening when the papers landed in his hands at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time, because Karen and I were sitting in her kitchen drinking tea when my phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen. I looked at Karen, She knew everything by then, had known for 2 weeks, had been the only person I'd told. And she gave me a single, steady nod. I answered. "What is this?" His voice was controlled, not panicked yet, but compressed, the way pressure sounds when it's looking for a release valve. "What is this filing, Laura?" "It's exactly what it says it is," I said. "This is insane. You need to call this off. You need to call your lawyer and tell her to withdraw this before it gets to a point we can't come back from." "We're already past that point, Daniel." There was a silence. Then his voice dropped, and the control slipped just slightly. Just enough for me to hear the machinery underneath. "You don't know what you're doing. You're making a decision based on something you don't fully understand. There are things about my situation that are more complicated than—" "I have the PI report," I said. "I have Rachel's marriage certificate. I have your LLC filings. I have 12 years of receipts. What exactly don't I understand?" He hung up. The second call came 40 minutes later from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice. Calm, professional, vaguely threatening in the way that only very practiced people manage to be. He identified himself as Marcus Webb, Daniel's personal attorney in Charlotte. "Ms. Archer," he said, using my maiden name deliberately, I noticed, to remind me that my married name had no legal standing. "My client would like to propose a private resolution to this matter before it becomes a public record. He's prepared to be generous." "My attorney handles all communications," I said. "Her number is on the filing. Ms. Archer, I'd encourage you to think carefully. My client has significant resources, and a protracted legal battle would be—" "Have a good evening, Mr. Webb," I said, and ended the call. My hands were trembling. I put the phone face down on Karen's kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the wood. Karen put her hand over mine and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The next move came not from Daniel but from Rachel, though not the Rachel I expected. The following morning, I received a text from Rachel's number that felt different from our usual exchanges. Shorter, colder. Maybe we should reconsider the public approach. My lawyer says there could be consequences for both of us. Daniel wants to meet. He says he can explain. I read it twice. Then I called Rachel directly. She answered on the second ring, and her voice told me immediately that something had changed. She sounded uncertain, or pressured, or both. "Has Daniel contacted you?" I asked. A pause. "He called last night. He wasn't threatening. He said things were more complicated than we knew." "Rachel," I said carefully, "he is managing us. Do you understand? He is doing what he's always done, controlling the information. He called you because I wouldn't take his calls." Another pause, longer. "I know," she said finally quietly. "I know. He was crying, Laura." "He's very good at that," I said. She didn't respond, but she didn't hang up. And when I said, "Rachel, we hold the line," she said, Okay, yes, we hold the line." Patricia received a formal letter from Marcus Webb the following day, proposing a private settlement, a lump sum to both Rachel and me in exchange for dropping the civil suit and signing NDAs. The number was not small. I won't put the figure here, but it was designed to look like an answer. I declined without deliberation. The escalation came on a Friday evening. Daniel showed up at my school, in the parking lot, at 3:45 in the afternoon while students were still filing out, and waited by my car. I saw him from the building entrance and stopped walking. He looked rough, tired, but his eyes were sharp. "You're going to embarrass both of us," he said when I reached the car. "You know what happens when this becomes public record? Our friends, your colleagues, my family. Everyone finds out, and there's no going back from that." "That's correct," I said. "Laura." His voice broke, just slightly, just enough. I made terrible mistakes. I know that. But destroying everything isn't the answer. I thought about 12 years. I thought about the Saturday crosswords. I thought about the way he'd opened the wrong cabinet for a glass. You destroyed everything, I said. I'm just filing the paperwork. I got in my car and drove away. That weekend, I went to a small rental cabin in Hocking Hills that Karen had booked for me. 2 nights, deep woods, no phone signal worth mentioning. I walked the trails, cooked simple meals, read an entire novel cover to cover for the first time in months. Biscuit slept across my feet every night. On Sunday evening, sitting on the cabin's small porch in the dark, listening to the forest, I felt not happy, not yet, not by a long way, but solid, like a woman who had found the floor beneath the water. I drove home Monday morning, ready for whatever came next. The cabin had done what cabins do when you desperately need them. It had given me enough silence to hear my own thoughts again. I came back to Columbus on Monday morning to a house that felt different only because I was different in it. The pale yellow walls, the garden where the tomatoes had always underperformed, Biscuit's water bowl by the door. All of it looked the same and meant something entirely new. I moved through it like a woman taking inventory before a move, which, in a sense, I was. Daniel had not returned to the house in my absence. I didn't know where he was. Charlotte, a hotel. I neither knew nor particularly cared. And Patricia had advised me to document any attempts at contact and to avoid direct confrontations. His access to the property was legally complicated given our marriage's void status, and she was preparing a motion to address occupancy rights. For the moment, I had the house, I had Biscuit, and I had a slowly solidifying sense of direction. The temptation came, as these things often do, from a sideways angle. It arrived on Tuesday in the form of a voicemail from David Marsh, Daniel's older brother, a man I had genuinely liked for 9 years, who had taught me to make his mother's cornbread recipe and once driven 4 hours through a snowstorm to help us when our furnace died. His voice on the message was warm and careful and achingly familiar. Laura, it's David. I know this is a hard time. I've spoken with Dan, and Look, I just want you to know there might be a way to handle this quietly. Something that works for everyone. I don't think you want to put yourself through a trial. I don't think Daniel wants that either. Can we just talk? Just the two of us. Coffee somewhere? I listened to it twice. Then I thought about the word quietly. How it was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I thought about how Daniel had selected David for this particular task. Because David was the one person in that family I'd trusted, which meant Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. I called David back and kept it brief. I told him I valued our years of friendship, that I held him no ill will, but that I could not discuss the case outside of legal channels, and I asked him to respect that boundary. He sounded genuinely sad. I believed that he was. It didn't change anything. The following day brought a different approach. Rachel texted again. The real Rachel this time, back in our coordinated channel, not the uncertain voice I'd heard the week before. He had his lawyer contact my sister. She attached a screenshot of an email Marcus Webb had sent to Rachel's sister, Diane, framed as a concerned outreach, offering Diane a number to call to help broker a peaceful resolution for Rachel's sake. Rachel had found out when Diane called her, baffled. He's working every angle, I texted back. I know, she replied. I'm done being surprised by it. That steadiness in her was new. I recognized it because I had recently acquired my own version. Patricia called that afternoon with a progress update. The bigamy complaint filed with the Columbus Police Department, a separate track from the civil suit, initiated at my request, had been accepted and assigned to a detective. Patricia had also received a subpoena response from Daniel's bank, meaning the financial discovery process was underway. Things were moving. "How are you holding up?" she asked at the end of the call. "Better," I said, and I meant it. The social support arrived not through any dramatic gesture, but through the ordinary accumulation of people who showed up when I finally let them. Karen, obviously. She was already in it with me. She'd taken emergency custody of Biscuit twice, fielded my 11 p.m. calls with nothing but patience, and had taken to referring to Daniel simply as "that man," in a tone that somehow conveyed 12 different varieties of contempt. Then there was Margot, my colleague from the English department, who sat with me in the teacher's lounge on a Wednesday afternoon after I finally told her a condensed version of the story. She didn't make a sound for a full 15 seconds after I finished. Then she said, "You know what? You are going to be fine, not good. Fine. There's a difference. Fine is better." It was a strange thing to say, and it was exactly right. My friend Deb from my graduate school years, who lived in Pittsburgh, drove over on a Saturday in early December with a lasagna and a bottle of wine, and the specific gift of someone who knows when to talk and when to simply sit. We ate at my kitchen table, and Deb told me about her own divorce 7 years earlier, not to compare, but to show that the far side of this kind of devastation exists and is habitable. And then, unexpectedly, my therapist. I had seen Dr. Sandra Osi a handful of times years ago for unrelated stress, and I called her office on an impulse one gray December morning. She had a cancellation slot that Thursday. I sat in her beige chair and talked for 50 minutes, and at the end, she said something that reframed the entire past month for me. "You're not just dealing with a betrayal. You're grieving a person who never existed. And that's a particular kind of loss that doesn't have good cultural language yet. A person who never existed." I drove home thinking about that. The Daniel I had believed in, steady, responsible, mine, had been a constructed character, a performance given for my benefit. I wasn't grieving a lost marriage. I was grieving a fiction. Somehow, naming it that way made it smaller. Not painless, but smaller. Daniel and Marcus Webb went quiet that week. No new contact attempts, no letters through Patricia's office. Just stillness. Patricia warned me this was probably tactical rather than genuine retreat. They were watching, reassessing, deciding where to push next. "Let them watch," I said. They came on a Saturday in December, 12 days before Christmas, when the world was doing its best to look cheerful, and I was doing mine to stay focused. Daniel didn't come alone. He brought Linda, his mother, a woman I had called Mom for 9 years, who had shown me the cornbread recipe in person, who had danced with me at what everyone present had believed was her son's wedding. She was 71 years old, wore her silver hair in a bun, and was one of the most emotionally intelligent people I had ever met, which was precisely why Daniel had brought her. They knocked. I opened the door because Patricia had not told me I was legally required to refuse them entry to a property I currently occupied, and because I wanted to see what this particular play looked like up close. We sat in the living room, the same living room where Daniel and I had watched movies, where Biscuit still claimed the left corner of the couch, where the Christmas cards from friends and colleagues were propped on the mantel like a small accusation. I sat in the armchair across from the couch. They sat together, close, Linda's hand on Daniel's arm. Daniel looked carefully put together, clean shave, the navy sweater I'd bought him 2 birthdays ago, a demeanor of rehearsed humility. Linda looked genuinely distressed, which I didn't doubt. Whatever Daniel had done, his mother was an innocent bystander in her own grief. "Laura," Linda began, I love you like a daughter. I think you know that. And I am not here to excuse what Daniel did, but I am asking you to consider what a trial, what a public record does to a family, to multiple families. I understand this is painful for you, I said. I mean that. Then can we please? Linda. I kept my voice gentle but even. I have thought about this more carefully than I have thought about almost anything in my life. My decision hasn't changed. Daniel spoke then. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice was low and measured. The voice he used when he was about to explain something to someone he considered to be overreacting. You're a teacher, Laura. You understand nuance. You understand that human situations are complicated. What happened between Rachel and me was, it had been over emotionally for years, long before you and I got together. I should have handled it differently. I know that. But what we had was built on my not knowing you had a wife, I said. You're reducing it. I'm clarifying it. I felt the first flicker of anger and let it pass through without feeding it. Daniel, I want to be precise with you. You are not here because you feel remorse. You are here because the filing has been accepted, because the detective has been assigned, and because your attorney told you that a sympathetic approach through family was the next logical step. I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it because it's true, and we are both too old for this particular performance. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something more like a man who has been playing chess and has just watched his opponent reveal they can see the board differently than he assumed. Linda tried once more. She reached across toward me, not touching, just extending. Laura, there are ways to resolve this privately. The lawyers don't have to be involved at this level. There are people, mediators. Patricia is handling all communications, I said. If you do this, Daniel said, and his voice had shifted now, the warmth evaporating like morning frost at noon. You will make an enemy of me. I want you to understand that. I have resources. I have a lawyer who does this for a living. You have a teacher's salary and a civil case that could drag for 2 years. Think about what that actually looks like for your life. There it was. I let the silence sit for a moment. Are you threatening me in front of your mother? I asked. Linda's face changed. She looked at her son. A quick, involuntary look of something I recognized as the specific horror of a parent seeing a child clearly for an uncomfortable instant. Daniel, she said quietly. He stood, pulled his coat from the arm of the couch. This was a mistake, he said. Probably, I agreed. They left. I closed the door and stood in my entryway, one hand on the deadbolt, and I felt it. A cold wave of something that was undeniably fear. He wasn't wrong that a prolonged legal battle would be brutal. He wasn't wrong that he had resources I didn't. These were real facts about real asymmetry, and only a fool would pretend otherwise. But the fear didn't paralyze me this time. It did something different. It sharpened everything. The way cold air makes outlines cleaner. I thought, if he were confident of winning, he would not be here. The visits, the voicemails through David, the letter to Rachel's sister. These were not the moves of a man holding a strong hand. These were the moves of a man trying to prevent the cards from being turned over. I went to the kitchen and made tea. I called Karen. I told her what happened. He threatened you directly, she said. More or less. Good, she said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who's been waiting for confirmation. Patricia needs to know about that. She was right. I texted Patricia a summary before I went to bed. Patricia replied at 7:30 the next morning. Documented. This actually helps us. The deposition was scheduled for January 14th, In a conference room at Patricia's firm, a practical beige space with a long table, water pitchers, and the specific silence of rooms where recorded truth is expected. Present, Patricia and me, Marcus Webb and Daniel, a court reporter named Sheila, who typed with the unruffled speed of someone who has heard everything, and, because Rachel's civil case had been formally consolidated with mine, Rachel's attorney, a brisk woman named Gloria Tang, who had the focused energy of someone who billed by the 6-minute increment and intended every second to count. Rachel was not physically in the room. She was connected via video conference on a laptop at the end of the table, her face composed and still on the screen. Daniel arrived looking controlled. The same navy coat, a crisp collar, a posture carefully calibrated to project the steady reasonableness of an engineer asked to account for a minor discrepancy. Marcus Webb sat beside him, a yellow legal pad in front of him that he touched with the deliberate frequency of a man reminding himself to look prepared. I sat across from Daniel for the first time since his visit to my house. I did not look away. I don't know what he read in my face, but whatever it was made him look first at the water pitcher and then at his attorney. Patricia began methodically. She walked Daniel through the timeline: the Charlotte courthouse marriage in 2013, the Columbus marriage in 2015, the maintenance of both households, the LLC's function in distributing income. Daniel answered in careful, abbreviated sentences. Yes, he had married Rachel. Yes, he had later married me. He characterized it, and I watched Marcus Webb's expression carefully as he did, as a situation that evolved in ways that were not properly resolved. Not properly resolved. Gloria Tang looked up from her notepad. Mr. Marsh, she said, your client has stated that his marriage to Ms. Holloway was not properly resolved. Can you explain what resolution you believed was underway in June 2015, approximately 22 months after the Charlotte marriage, when you entered a second marriage ceremony with Ms. Archer in Columbus? Marcus Webb made a motion to limit the question's scope. Gloria waited. Daniel answered, and this was the first crack, that he had understood in his mind the Charlotte marriage to be informally concluded, because he and Rachel had been living largely separate lives. Mr. Marsh, Patricia said, picking up the thread, is it your position that a marriage can be informally concluded without a divorce decree? I understood. Yes or no, Mr. Marsh? Does Ohio or North Carolina law provide for the informal conclusion of a marriage? I'm not a lawyer. You are, however, a licensed professional engineer who, according to the financial documents and evidence, established and actively managed a limited liability company for 11 years across 2 states and filed taxes in both jurisdictions. I'd ask you to set aside the suggestion that you didn't understand the relevant legal frameworks. Marcus Webb intervened. There was a whispered consultation. Daniel came back with a revised answer that was more carefully hedged, and it was worse, because the hedging was visible, and Sheila, the court reporter, typed every syllable. It went on for 2 hours. The moment the room changed, the moment I felt the shift like a pressure drop before weather, was in the 2nd hour, when Gloria introduced the financial records Rachel's forensic accountant had prepared. The records showed, in documented transactions, the movement of money through the LLC into 2 separate household accounts, with internal labels that Daniel had used in his own bookkeeping. One labeled Columbus and one labeled Charlotte. Daniel stared at the documents for a long time. These are your labels, Mr. Marsh? Gloria asked. The LLC had various accounts. These are your labels, yes or no? And they appear to be. So for the purpose of internal bookkeeping, you maintained parallel household designations. Marcus Webb said, I'd like to note for the record that my client— These are your labels, Mr. Marsh, Gloria said again, addressing Daniel directly with a patience that was in itself a form of pressure. Yes, Daniel said, quietly, flatly. I looked at Rachel's face on the laptop screen. She was watching Daniel with an expression I recognized, the specific stillness of someone who knew this moment was coming and had been preparing for it long enough that the arrival produced not shock, but a strange, almost sorrowful relief. Daniel looked up from the financial documents, and for one unguarded moment, his eyes met mine. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He looked away first. After the deposition, in the corridor, while the attorneys gathered their materials, Marcus Webb pulled Patricia aside for a brief, low-voiced exchange. I stood by the elevator with my bag on my shoulder, watching the city through the glass wall of the corridor. Columbus in January, pale and still, cars moving quietly below on the wet street. Patricia came to stand beside me 10 minutes later. "He wants to talk settlement," she said. "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I thought about the Columbus label and the Charlotte label in his own handwriting. I thought about 12 years. I thought about Biscuit and the vegetable garden and the crossword puzzle and the cabinet he'd forgotten about, because he'd spent 1 week in Charlotte and 1 week with me and had never quite managed to keep us completely straight. "I want what I'm entitled to," I said. "Every cent. On the record." Patricia nodded once, the way Patricia nodded when an answer aligned with her own assessment. "Then that's what we go for." The settlement negotiations lasted 3 weeks and accomplished nothing. Marcus Webb came in with a number that was, Patricia told me without inflection, an opening offer calibrated to insult your intelligence while technically constituting a figure. I declined it. He came back with a revised figure that was less insulting. I declined that too. On the third round, Patricia laid out what we would accept and what the alternative looked like, which was a full trial with every financial document, every deposition transcript, and the complete dual household bookkeeping system becoming part of the public court record, and the negotiation effectively ended. Daniel settled. The agreement was reached on a Thursday afternoon in February, signed with the quiet efficiency of people who have run out of positions to defend. The terms were extensive and, from where I stood, appropriate. A lump sum representing my proportional contribution to the joint mortgage over 9 years, plus damages for fraudulent misrepresentation under Ohio law, plus a structured disbursement from the LLC, the entity that had, for over a decade, funded his parallel life at partial expense of contributions that should have been directed elsewhere. Rachel's settlement, negotiated by Gloria Tang simultaneously, was substantially larger. She had the valid marriage and the longer duration of harm, and the financial entanglement ran deeper. The bigamy charge was a separate matter. The Columbus detective had completed his investigation and referred the case to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in January. The charge, bigamy, 4th-degree felony under Ohio law, was formally filed in February, the same week the civil settlement was signed. Daniel did not fight it. His criminal attorney negotiated a plea to a reduced charge in exchange for full cooperation and a stipulated financial penalty. He avoided prison, but received a conviction on his record, formal probation, and a restitution order. Marcus Webb, I was told, dropped Daniel as a client shortly after the plea. The day the civil settlement check cleared, I was standing at my kitchen counter in the pale yellow house on Clover Street. It was a gray February morning. Biscuit was asleep in a bar of weak sunlight on the floor. I had a mug of coffee in my hand and nothing in particular to do until noon. I thought about how normal it felt, how ordinary. The house, Patricia had advised me, was mine to remain in pending a partition order, and given the void status of the marriage and my sole contribution to several renovation costs we documented, my position was stronger than it might have been. I ended up buying Daniel's interest out, using a portion of the settlement, which had the symmetry of a closed circle, and the title transferred cleanly in March. The morning it transferred, Karen came over with a bottle of champagne at 9 a.m., which I told her was unreasonably early, and which we opened anyway and drank with orange juice out of the good glasses. "To being done," Karen said. "To being done," I agreed. There is a thing that happens after a long, sustained effort when the effort finally ends. A kind of hollow exhaustion that feels, paradoxically, almost peaceful. I had been operating at high alert for months, careful, strategic, watchful. And now I could simply stand in my kitchen on a March morning, holding a champagne glass with orange juice in it, and feel the machinery quiet down. Daniel left Ohio. I don't know precisely where he went, and I have not inquired. His name became, in our legal documents and in my mind, simply a reference number, a case, a resolved matter. The professional consequences for him spread organically, the way these things do in professional communities. Engineering firms talk to each other. License boards receive certain kinds of filings. A fourth-degree felony conviction, even a reduced one, attaches to a professional record in ways that do not quietly disappear. At the school where I teach, very few people knew the complete story. Margot knew. My principal, when I'd requested a personal day during the deposition week, had guessed something significant was happening and had extended professional courtesy without prying. The students knew nothing, which was appropriate, and the work, 31 juniors reading Fitzgerald, 34 seniors working through Their Eyes Were Watching God, had been, through all of it, the most stabilizing thing in my life. Classes happen at the same time every day. Essays require the same things from students regardless of what their teachers are carrying. There's a particular comfort in that consistency. Rachel and I spoke by phone the week after both settlements closed. It was a longer conversation than our usual brief, coordinated exchanges. The first one that wasn't fundamentally about logistics or legal coordination. "What do you do now?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," I said. "Something normal. I think normal sounds very good." She laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd heard from her. "Yeah," she said. "Me too. We were not friends exactly. We were something harder to name. Two people who had been through the same storm from different shores. We agreed to stay loosely in contact. I meant it. I think she did too. The last document I signed in the case was the final divorce decree, or rather, the legal nullification of a void marriage, which required its own specific paperwork, its own category of ending. Patricia handed it to me across her desk on a morning in late March. "Anything you want to say?" she asked. I thought about it. "Just, thank you," I said. "You were steady all the way through." She accepted that with the particular brevity of someone who is very good at their job. "So were you," she said. I walked out of her building into the first genuinely warm morning of the year. The trees were just beginning to make their tentative decisions about leaves. I drove home. Spring came in the way Ohio springs always do. Tentatively, then all at once. I repainted the front door a deep terracotta color that Daniel had always said was too bold. It took me 4 hours on a Saturday and biscuits supervised from the porch. And when I stepped back and looked at it, I felt something unexpected. Genuine, uncomplicated pleasure. Mine. I threw myself back into teaching as a return, not an escape. I launched the creative writing elective I'd been proposing for 3 years. 12 students, Thursday afternoons, too much coffee. That group gave me more than I gave them. I started sleeping deeply again. The kind of sleep that means your nervous system finally believes you're safe. By fall, I was dating carefully, without urgency. The 5th person was James, a history teacher at a school across town, met at a professional development workshop where we were both visibly suffering through a curriculum mapping PowerPoint. He was patient, funny, and specific in his attention. He knew I'd come through something significant. I told him the broad strokes, and he listened without pressing. We took it slowly. It was the right speed. By the following spring, Karen, Margot, and Deb had each given me their verdict independently. He's good, I agreed. As for Daniel, his engineering license was suspended for 18 months following the conviction. The LLC was dissolved. The financial settlements had materially impacted him. What reached me through mutual professional channels was that he had become preternaturally careful. The ease and warmth that had been his primary tools apparently gone. Someone described him as like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop permanently. I set that observation down. It wasn't my concern anymore. Rachel sold the Charlotte house, relocated to Raleigh, and built something incrementally her own. She texted me once, "Are you happy?" I thought before answering, because the question deserved precision. In a way that feels earned, I wrote back. "Completely," she replied. "I won't claim I was transformed by what happened. What I am is intact, arrived on the far side, recognizably myself." The same English teacher who loved their eyes were watching God and overwatered the tomatoes. What was different was not the person. It was the certainty. A quiet, working knowledge that when the floor drops out, I can find it again. Biscuit, for his part, was thriving. Looking back, I learned this. A lie sustained by your silence only survives if you keep cooperating with it. The moment I stopped cooperating, stopped explaining away the receipts, the cabinet, the careful distance, everything changed. I learned that legal counsel is not aggression. It is a language that certain situations require. And I learned that being underestimated is, in the end, a strategic advantage. What would you have done if a stranger sent you that message? If this story moved you, leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and thank you, genuinely, for staying with me to the end.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.